Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Chris Jackson, and Fred and I were just talking about how we go about overcoming cultural resistance to things like better reliability engineering practices.
Yep, exactly. And it was somebody, Mark, actually used the comment form at accendoreliability.com/go/SOR.
Fantastic.
Most of our questions come in through LinkedIn, it seems like, and occasionally direct email, which is all fine. But Mark chose to use the comment form that we've mentioned for 648 episodes out of the 780 that we've done or whatever, a few times. So that's cool. But Mark asked, he said he's working in a plant maintenance reliability type role. And he just paraphrasing what he was talking about is he listened to an episode 77. So Mark recommends listening to that. I thought it was very good. And it was about cultural resistance to reliability. And so he said, we can come in and we can, set up processes, and we can clean up the data. We can show them data analysis, and we can do all this cool stuff. But then the maintenance team, the operations team, just revert back to whatever they want to do anyway. It's just a cultural resistance to addressing preventative maintenance or predictive maintenance, for example. If we have good data, if we make the right measurements, we could avoid downtime kind of thing. We make all those arguments and you put all this stuff in place, and they go, yeah, all right, whatever, I'm going to ignore that. And they go about doing what they're doing. And I fully get that. I've seen that in organizations. And I know, Chris, you've been in some that have, we're going to do it this way. I don't really care what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I think where a lot of organizations who make what they believe to be genuine attempts to improve reliability engineering practices, which require some sort of cultural paradigm shift, I see a lot of them fail when they simply create like a working group of people that sit over there on a Tuesday, come up with some great ideas, and then essentially they generate processes and things like that, which get put into the library of processes that the organization has, and then expect after these processes have been formalized that there's going to be a groundswell of jubilation and relief that someone has added another process to their life. And it just doesn't happen that way.
Well, when you put it that way, I'm resistant to it. I'm just like,
right.
No, I don't need another form to fill out. I just don't.
Right, and that's organisations who want to say that they take reliability seriously, and so they get the working group. As soon as it becomes a working group, and that working group includes people who aren't really particularly senior, they might be old but not senior. Or from the start that the leadership team just want the problem to go away, and having a working group with outcomes and outputs is one way of them convincing themselves that they're doing something about it, but it's not the case. And so then you have those scenarios where I believe the question comes from, where we've come up with these wonderful processes, but the maintenance team, for example, they're not doing it. They're not implementing them. Well, maintenance teams often have factors that drive motivation that actually prevent them from doing the things you want them to do. So you're asking a maintainer to fix something, for example, and then spend time measuring it or taking notes or doing whatever you want them to do in order to track how the failure is degrading or progressing over time, which is fantastic. But if the maintenance team is evaluated on how fast they do maintenance, and the faster they do maintenance, the better their performance appraisals or bonuses or what have you, you got no chance, absolutely no chance for them to do what you want them to do. And the reality is they have to exchange their, in some cases, bonus structures, which is dollars that can be used to buy food for their family against your request to fill in additional forms after every job. It's never going to happen. And so you need to start from the start. And before you introduce a new process to the team, you need to explain to the team why they should be motivated and excited to do it, and remove those cultural barriers. Leadership need to be involved, etc., etc., etc. Otherwise, the organisation is confusing effort with outcomes.
I've railed against procurement organizations for years that have the 10% cost reduction year over year on all the components they buy, for example, all the parts they buy. I ran into one plant that had a stockroom that had a goal of reducing costs 10% year over year. So not having parts in the house ready to go fix something was not one of their goals. So they would just wholesale get rid of a whole shelf of stuff and not restock it until somebody said, "Oh, I need that bearing." And then the equipment's down for 2 days while we're trying to rush order this bearing in here. They achieved their budgetary objective of cost reduction, yet didn't factor in. And this goes back to just KPIs and the whole idea of setting objectives that have balance and all this other stuff. There's parts to that, but there's also just, even if they weren't tied to the bonus structure and they recognize that, oh yeah, that would help me if I knew what these symptoms were before I came out here and I could take the right kit with me and I could execute the repair, that would save me going back and forth and we get the line up running quicker. And even if we're setting up processes that would help them achieve their repairs better or faster or more assuredly that it would fix the right problem, whatever those kinds of things, and separate from bonus structure, separate from motivations, everything else, even if we're aligning exactly with that, there's just an inherent resistance to change in general. And so the same things you were talking about, Chris, of, how's this really help? What's the onboarding? Let's get the why this is the right thing to do, is a whole different process than having a meeting on Tuesday for a couple of months and then rolling out, I'll just do this now. There's this part of, there's a whole book full of all these methods of tools and techniques that we can pull out and apply. But the resistance part is interpersonal. That's the cultural part, is how people think about stuff and make decisions and work together. That's not in the book. That's not an FMEA, right? That's not a kitting process that, is contingent on the equipment and the symptoms that you're getting. That is so often overlooked. Oh, we got this great new process. And then, all right, they weren't in the training. They don't know what that is. They don't know how it applies. What's in it for them, kind of thing, is the first level of resistance. And then there's a second level of, well, we tried something last month and that didn't work, so we're not going to try this one.
Yeah, leadership. I'm just that phrase keeps going through my head. I mean, I have seen very few instances where people genuinely rail against the genuine leadership direction, under the visage of resistance to change, if there is even a modicum worth of leadership momentum behind it. So, for example, a leader can sit in that boardroom and say, okay, mechanical engineering design team, just make sure it works, okay? Make sure it passes that test. Make sure whatever you do, make sure you go speak to that working group and make sure everything's above board. Make sure this, make sure that. So the problem with those sorts of directions, even though it makes that leader feel, across it, is that it's just essentially go and expend effort. I'm not going to tell you what I want you to achieve. I'm going to go and tell you, just make sure that you've done what you need to do to tick a box, or done what you need to do to make this working group happy. Or just make sure that test you pass, as opposed to what are we trying to achieve. So a leader who instead says, hey, look, we've had understand these components, these dielectrics we're making, use a real world example, it's going into a machine that needs to have a 5% failure probability after 5 years. That's its warranty period. And it has hundreds of components. And so this little dielectric, its reliability needs to exceed 99%, which means that we know that 2% of our dielectrics are manufactured with imperfections that we like to fob off as manufacturing infant mortality, and we exclude them from data analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You go, no. In fact, every single failure that matters is going to be an infant mortality failure. So you need to focus accordingly. All of a sudden, you're starting a conversation as a leader where you're giving actual direction, which means stuff to technical people. And it's a world of difference how you approach that. And that of itself is not cultural change. That is a leader saying, I need you to focus on this aspect. You could actually, it is a cultural change because leadership essentially drives the culture. But it needs to be a critically deep or intelligent comment from the start from the people who matter.
Right. It's easy to tell when you get a brush off, like, oh yeah, just go do your reliability stuff, versus how's this affect the business? Let's dive into this. All right, now I get it. We got to do this, this, and this. Here's the options. Here that fits into this vision. That's where we got to go. As opposed to, just, start a working group. Come back in a couple of years with the results. Let me know. It's night and day difference is what you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of a sudden, what then gets set up as cultural change or change management, if the boss is saying, hey, we need to focus on infant mortality failures for these following reasons. And like I was explaining to a client, where one of the vendors essentially wanted to present data analysis where they were able to exclude what appeared to be infant mortality failures. Mm-hmm. They were sort of umming and ahhing, going, oh, yeah, they're outliers, aren't they? I go, well, no, they're not outliers.
They're real failures that occurred.
But just to be clear, based on the reliability goals you've told me, then the only failures that matter from this particular component for you guys are infant mortality failures. In fact, let's not worry about any other type of failure. The only failure that matters is infant mortality. So as opposed to sending messages to your vendors where you allow them to fudge or just interpret data in a particular way, say, look, the things that you're excluding are the only things we're interested about. Exclude everything else. All I want to know is the reliability characteristics of those first 5% of failures. That's all I care about. You could argue that's a cultural change, but it's also making stuff happen.
Yeah. So what do you do in an organization where, your engineering team gets it, basically? So you're working with the team and you're getting the engineering stuff set in place, and they really like this idea of improving uptime of your plant, and predictive maintenance is on board the way to go. But you don't have the leadership team. So now when you transfer over to the maintenance group or to operations team, you just get a brick wall. Somewhere in that leadership structure, I've gotten to the point in some cases where they say, I just don't know what to say. So I'd write them a script, basically. It's like speech writer, basically, on a couple of occasions. But at HP, it was a very popular class. I would go to a site and I would do design for reliability courses or classes for a couple of days. And it was almost all engineers and engineering managers. But then I would spend 2 hours doing the 3 questions managers need to be able to ask, or something that was a just dirt simple intro to reliability. And I looked them right in the eye, and it would be senior managers, and I'd say, you don't have the time nor the inclination or desire to really know reliability engineering, which is fine. You got a lot of other things that you need to pay attention to and all the other good stuff. But you need to convey that it's important, and they all would agree. And it says, and to do that, you need to ask 3 questions really well, and it conveys that you understand enough and you're asking the right questions, and then you'll be seen as a leader. And they all started taking notes. It was bizarre. Just give them. And one of them was, where's the data? Show me the data. It was just basic questions. What's one of them was along the lines of if somebody shows them a calculation or a comparison or well, what's the confidence on that? Show me the data. What's the confidence, and how does that impact the bottom line, or how does that impact reliability? And then it could vary a whole pile from there, depending on their division. But anyway, the idea was that sometimes it takes coaching the senior managers to be able to ask those right questions. And sometimes they want that coaching. They want to know, we want to achieve this reliability objective. So there's uptime objectives. How do I do that? How do I put that together? They want to do predictive maintenance to get increased, better uptime. But their messaging has always been, just get the uptime, just make it work better. And so parts of the organization interpret that as, don't do anything except fix it fast, right? So how do you help somebody craft that message appropriately so that you get a more efficient result to what they were trying to do?
I think managers are looking for, those wonderful, like you say, speeches they can write where the words are perfect and motivational and convey a just desperate need or desperate desire to do something that's inherently good. But I said my experience is that you just cannot walk away from what happens thereafter. And I think a lot of managers want to do that. Mm-hmm. So if you have, as a leader or a manager, let's use the term manager here, because their aim is to, for example, increase uptime. So it's all well and good crafting the perfectly scripted message that gets delivered immaculately in the conference room on 3:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. But then what I find is way more important, I think it's too dissimilar to what you're talking about, is then that leader or manager needs to go down to the production line or the plant or what have you, and start talking and start saying things like to the hydraulic engineer, for example, what would you do if you wanted to improve the uptime for this particular pump or this whatever it is? Mm-hmm. Or what keeps you up at night? What can we do to help you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Going back to the what keeps you up at night, that's a question I love asking, because it sort of takes a sort of statistical or engineering perceived peer-reviewed answer that you need to respond. Just say, what keeps you up at night about this thing failing? Yeah. Or what's going to cause this thing to fail? Well,
it's the duct tape holding this pressure vessel together. That's what keeps me up at night, because we don't have the money to actually fix this thing. Because that's a problem. Yeah, it'll explode next week if we don't fix it. Oh, okay. We might want to get on that.
Well, then if you as a leader or the manager go, okay, I hear what you're saying, and next week that duct tape has been removed with the proper cast iron brace or something mm-hmm. like that, that's when people start believing you. I mean, people say, oh, okay, the boss actually said in this conference room on Wednesday at 3:30 that we're going to try and improve uptime. When he came down here a week later and he talked to me, he listened, or he or she listened, and I came up with some good ideas. And within a month or so, and he or she kept me updated to say, look, I can't do it straight away, but we're going to get it this cycle, so on and so forth. That's when people start buying in, because they're not going to do anything where there is no perceived payoff or outcome.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a simple, how do I craft a message? It's how do you, how do I demonstrate that I'm interested in this stuff? And we talk a lot about in many textbooks and quality discussions how the Japanese sort of pioneered this approach. Mm-hmm. And it's how did those leaders work out a way of making quality a really important thing, or reliability just something a part of what they do? And the answer was, or at least it revolves around, they listened.
Yeah.
It was the workforce that came up with all these wonderful ideas, and the leaders actually spent most of the time collating these ideas, prioritizing which ones are the best, and then making them happen. All of a sudden, a culture was born.
Yep. Now my first engineering job was manufacturing engineer, and I thought, oh well, I need to go on the manufacturing floor. And my coworker engineer team, they wear nice, clean clothes. They, went out to lunch. They rarely walk down the stairs to the plant. Rarely. Like, oh, you're going downstairs? Here, take this message to Joe. Sarah needs this over here. Can you carry that down there for her? Okay. And I spent way more time on the floor. Just because, one, it is, if I'm going to help make this equipment run better or more efficient or get more throughput or reduce scrap or all these charters I was, assigned to take care of, all these charters I'm assigned to take care of, I needed to understand the equipment. And who better to understand the equipment than the people that are actually running it? And so I spent a lot of time with those folks. And I remember Nancy came up one time and says, we're getting these lumps. And if you cut them open, it's the polymer's not melted. So, it happened in the extrusion line when we put the jacket on. It's, could you take a look at that? Because it's really causing us to scrap a lot. And so here's a lead and an area that packaged these cabling products saying, I've done what I can do. Can you help solve this one? And, make a long story short, we spent a lot of time at the extruding area doing different setups and different mixing methods and heats and all kinds of stuff, and working close with because the guys doing the extrusion, they don't have their hand on the line the whole time feeling the bumps. They didn't know they were happening. And I bring over, a whole bucket of them saying, this came from the last run you guys did. I know you don't remember it. You're running one after another, but this is causing all this problem, And they're like, oh, well, we don't want to do that. And so they were very willing to help. And somebody was actually standing next to him saying, all right, well, how could this happen? And they weren't designers of screws and all the polymer scientists or anything else. But my coworkers were all polymer scientists. And they're like, oh, well, that's a mechanical problem. You got to just fix that. I'm like, okay, I'm not getting much in here. But both those teams that I ended up working with, were on board completely. And the funny part was we had a show and tell of accomplishments in the last quarter or something like that. And I printed out a control chart because we were starting to use a whole pile of different control chart type stuff. And one of our projects was to use them. And it showed the 14 defects out of a 10,000 foot reel. Over and over and over again. It bounced around, and it was very stable of how many defects we were getting per reel. And then we made the change to a new screw, a new technique of melting and mixing this polymer so that we got make sure everything was melted. And it went to less than one for, at that point, it was like couple hundred reels of this stuff. It was just, if it was your heartbeat, you went flatline.
Right.
Kind of thing. And I printed out in this huge piece of paper and put it on the desk and said, and the senior management walked in and they didn't even hear the briefing. They didn't know what the topic was. And they looked at the chart and they says, well, what happened here? They didn't know whether it was good or bad or anything. And then they were in the story and like, oh, this is way cool. And can you print this on smaller paper so I can share it and talk to other people about it? Yes. Here you go.
All of a sudden you got people buying in. But I think we talked about upstairs and downstairs people in the past where you have those engineers who go out to lunch and ask other people to take the post-it notes downstairs to Jillian and Bob because they don't like going downstairs and all sorts of things. But the people who are downstairs, if people from upstairs aren't prepared to even just walk downstairs and just start a conversation every single day, then they're not invested in anything you say. They're just not. It's a human thing. Why would you, as an engineer who doesn't want to go to the downstairs people on a matter of principle, how can you then expect these people to take anything you say with any level of priority? They won't.
Yep.
If you don't care, they don't.
Yep. Yeah. No, and I think it's and the cultural part is that touch, that conversation, that listening. And I think it's a key part of, I can ask questions about this extrusion process. I have a little bit more knowledge about how it's working, but I don't have all of it. And you're here every day and see lots of different solutions to all kinds of different problems. Let's get some feedback. And it's the same as if you're the senior manager coming down saying, what keeps you up at night? And then go act on it, make that happen. I think that's what changes and shifts a culture, is the listening and then following through, make stuff happen. And it can happen at all kinds of levels, but it's got to be consistent. I've had middle managers that, see, the senior boss says, hey, we need ideas. And they would filter the ideas to the ones they thought would be politically correct to send up. And I'm like, okay, you're just a stick in the mud here. You're in the way.
Yep.
Names to be not revealed in that case.
I love doing it.
Yeah. But anyway, back to Mark's question is the methods that we deploy in the aim of increasing uptime or improving reliability is our technical prowess. That's one part of what we do. It's the recognizing that you're going to have resistance to just change generically. And then even worse is when it's a cultural change in the or a cultural resistance in the organization where it's like, oh yeah, just go do stuff and they feel good about it. That's a more complicated problem to solve. And it starts with listening. It starts with sometimes is bringing awareness to and getting a champion on senior managers that understand how important it is and how much more valuable it is, those kinds of things. But it starts with just help other people solve problems, make their work and life better, those kinds of things. It starts chipping away at it at all levels. And then the cultural starts to sap, oh yeah, we need to do this. But if it's just imposed, like you said, Chris, it's just not going anywhere.
No, having an additional process is not going to all of a sudden revolutionize anyone's approach to what they do.
No, I don't think so. So anyway, that's one facet of I think, chipping away at Mark's comments and questions there. I'm sure there's some more in there. I'll bring it back to you again, Chris. I'll send you a copy of it. I kind of hit you cold with it today. But if you're like Mark, you can leave us a comment or a question, and we certainly will address it and send you back some answers and thoughts. And a shout out to Mark for going back in the back catalog, episode 77.
Yeah.
That was a long time ago.
Fantastic. That's before podcasts were invented. Isn't that right? Yeah,
it's getting close. Yeah. We used to use tin cans and strings to record that. Way back when. But anyway, head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR like Mark did, and you can leave us a comment, or you can even leave a voice message. Most people seem to use LinkedIn or direct email, which work just fine. You can find that for Chris and I and the other hosts on our About pages on Accendo, or you can find us on LinkedIn also directly, and whichever way works for you. But anyway, everybody, thanks for listening. And Chris, thanks for the chat. And hopefully it added a couple of insights there for Mark to consider. And Mark, if you're listening all the way through, let us know how we did. And if you got some follow-on questions, that'd be great. So with that, Chris, I think we'll wrap this one up.
No problem, Fred. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.